Learn all about change tracking, what it is, how to use it, how to get started, how it's different from change data capture, and how easily, more importantly, it is to get started. This week on Data Exposed. Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed. Today, I'm joined by Brian from the Azure SQL team. Brian, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you, Anna. So I'm Brian Spendolini. I'm a product manager in the Azure SQL Database group. I usually deal with application development, but I'm also a PM in helping out in the replication technologies. Again, with the application development, our main focus is to make everyone aware that SQL is cool to develop on. We have a lot of things with you've had previous videos with the local SQL development environment with Docker, the tight integration we have between VS Code and SQL extensions, as well as the ability to use SQL with GitHub Actions. So that's primarily my focus at this point. It may change, but again, for today, it is change tracking and developer experiences.
Cool. Awesome. Well, it's great to have you on the show, and we're excited to always be talking about developer-related topics. Those are some great topics that you mentioned, and I know change tracking is going to be a great one too, but not something we've talked about before on Data Exposed. So I'd love to kick it off by asking you, what is change tracking, and why would someone want to use it?
Yeah, that's a question we hear a lot. Change tracking has been around for a very long time in the SQL database. I think it was first appeared in SQL 2008. It is available in just about every version, from Edge all the way to the cloud, and everything in between. Now, change tracking gives you the ability to track changes that are in the database that happen based upon maybe an insert, an update, or delete. So change tracking is going to basically tell you when or how a row has changed. So is it an insert, an update, or delete? Which columns were involved with that change? And then again, which rows have changed over a specified period of time. Now, this is great because it's a little different than another feature we have, which is called change data tracking, or change data capture, I should say.
Yes.
With change data capture, we're also storing the actual data itself and what has changed in the previous row. But with change tracking, we're just keeping a record of what has changed and not actually the historical data. Now, you may be wondering, well, why would I use that? And why would I want to use that? We'll go into it really quick of all these use cases we have for it, because having that reduced data or that reduced information actually can be very beneficial in a few use cases, which, again, as I said, we will discuss. Now, why use change tracking? Getting back to that is, so we see a lot of people, developers, trying to implement this type of functionality within their database, but they're going to do it with custom code. So by using change tracking, you're going to reduce your development time. You're not going to need the need for triggers and separate tables and timestamp columns and tracking tables and cleanup processes. All these are going to be built into the actual feature. So as I go into here, all these features we have, as I said, reduced development time, there's no schema changes. So a lot of times if you're doing this yourself, you're going to have to add columns, remove columns, things like that. You don't have to do that if you've just enabled change tracking. It also is very low overhead. With change data capture, it uses the SQL agent or the scheduler in the cloud. With change tracking, there is no overhead like that. We just base it on the committed transaction. So as soon as the transaction is committed, we're going to take a record of that and put it into a side table. And then with this feature, we have standard tools and standard features and functions and procedures that you can use to extract this information and use it within your use cases. Now, going to use cases, when and where would you use this? So one of the big use cases we have is one-way and two-way synchronization of applications. So if you have an application such as maybe a caching tier or an application that caches certain data, this is great because you can link it to change tracking and only pull out the changes that you need rather than taking all that table or refreshing the table every time. For two-way synchronous applications, maybe like a disconnected application. Maybe you have an application that sits on someone's mobile device or their phone, and they're doing something maybe in a rural area, or they're doing something like a field technician or a field service technician, and they're in places where there is no cell coverage, or they're deep in some kind of tunnel or a warehouse where there is no coverage. They can use their application, and then once it comes back into range, you could sync back and forth, and change tracking is a great way to do that on either side. Data restore is another one. If you lose data in a table, you're doing a recovery and there's some data missing, you can quickly use change tracking to catch that up. And lastly, one of the big use cases we see is ETL. So the extract, transform, and load scenario. In this, usually it's a batch process. ETLs are batch processes. They happen at night. They happen on very large sets of data. Well, I can use change tracking. I can run this more frequently and only pull over the data that has changed over shorter periods of time to keep that data warehouse refreshed at a greater interval, which helps keep better analytics and better reporting, because instead of having that nightly load, I can do this multiple times throughout the day, maybe every hour, maybe every half an hour, just on smaller chunks of data, and be able to get that into that warehouse.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. I think it's a great explanation of what change tracking is. And then I also like how you compared it to change data capture, because it was one of the things that I was wondering, and as I was thinking about this topic. Some of the use cases are super interesting too. I've played a little bit with change tracking. I think one of the scenarios I had was like a fitness application on mobile, and where you wouldn't want to pull all the data every single time. You just want to go from like a specific version, and that's something that change tracking enables. So now that we have an understanding of like what it is, when you would use it, how it's different from CDC, like, could we take a look?
Yes, let's go and see this in action real quick here.
Okay.
So here I have a database, and we have Azure Data Studio here. And this is actually running on a hyperscale database, which is a great database for not only production, but for development. It's a smaller one. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on. And when we turn it on, we have two parameters here. We have change retention and auto cleanup. Change retention basically says how long am I going to keep these changes in these side tables? And then auto cleanup is if you want those automatic cleanup process to run on their own. So I can just run this, and it's going to enable it within my database. Next, we're going to just enable it on two tables. We have the AdventureWorks sample data loaded into this database, so I can just quickly run it on these tables. And now it is enabled. So we're ready to go. Change tracking is turned on. Change tracking is turned on these tables, and we're done. That's as easy as it is to turn on. We also have two of these system tables, change tracking database and change tracking tables. So this is going to tell me, maybe if I ran this in the master database, but we'll just run it on our own, it says that yes, it's turned on. Auto cleanup is on. Our retention period is 2 days. And then if we look actually at the tables we're tracking, we can run this and we can say, oh, here are the two tables. There's some versions. We'll talk about the versions in a minute, but is column tracking on? Is again, column tracking, which is here, it will add some information within our side tables to say which columns were actually changed, not the data in them, but which columns were changed, which allows you to make specific ETL queries a little bit more precise in that data load. And we'll talk about that in a second. So again, if we want to use this, we're going to just quickly update list price of product 680, and we'll just run this. Now that we've run this, it's going to update that row. And now if we look at it, and we're going to use the built-in function change table, and it's going to get that data from our side table, and we're going to pass in actually null for our version number. We'll get into version numbers in a second. But here we can see that our first version number is 1 because it's a sequence. We'll just expand this a little bit. So there's our change version. It was an update. Here's the column. And then every side table is going to also have the primary key added to it as well. So now I can go in here and I can also you see a column here that says sys change context. So I can use this column for actually adding text about that particular update, insert, and delete. So if I run this one really quickly, and that's done, and I go back and I look at this table, that side table again, I can see, here is my converted context, and I can maybe put some information about that. So it's very easy to use, and you see that it's already tracking these two updates, and it has the product ID, our primary key, on those tables. So this also does it based on transaction ID. So here are two transactions that I can run. Now it's going to be separate, but if we look at our table, we're going to see that our version numbers are actually two different version numbers. But just an example of how version numbers work, here is something that's going to update multiple columns, but it's in the same transaction. So if I run this, and we go back and look at our table again, we're going to see that this particular row or these particular updates all share the same version number because it was within the same transaction. Now, skipping ahead real quick, I just wanted to talk about where you said we're tracking those particular columns. So this is important in an ETL type of situation. So I'm going to do an update, and it's going to update the size column and the weight column on this particular product. And there it's done. And what I can do now is I can say, oh, well, show me this, but I'm going to use another built-in function called change tracking is in column mask, and we're going to pass in the size column. And if we look at our results here, we can see that this particular function we passed in is returning a 1 because in the last update we did, we have that column. So that's going to be important when we look at ETL scenarios. So let's just, for sake of time here, push into an ETL scenario and how we would do this with change tracking. So here is an ETL scenario, and what I've done is I've linked the actual changes to that table. And so let's say I wanted to do an ETL process right now, and I run this. It's going to say, oh, here are the product ID, the name, and the list prices of the changes that happen in that database. And you can see that if this was a nightly batch, obviously we might take the whole thing, but now I can run this on shorter periods of time and just pull over only the rows that have changed. Now, going back to that column scenario, I can say, hey, what if I have a particular process that I only want to get out only when a particular column has changed? Well, here again, I can use that column tracking is in the change tracking is in column mask function and say, okay, this particular process only wants to know changes when the size column has changed. I run this, and there it is. There's that size change because we know that we're looking at that column that was in the sys change column. So very powerful built-in features, very powerful features overall for tracking changes when you don't need the historical data like you normally have with change data capture.
Nice, cool. This is super interesting. Great demonstrations that really help me understand like how it works and how I might use it in my applications. I think our users probably found it useful too. As we close, do you have any tips or tricks for folks who are just getting started with change tracking?
Yeah, so just to remember, change tracking will work in any version of the SQL database, all the way from edge to the cloud, from 2008 and beyond. And it's very easy to get up and running. It's 2 commands. And we'll also have all of these scripts that we ran today. We'll put them on GitHub for people to see. We have some Learn modules actually that we can link below in the description that you can look at and go run. So that'll run you through doing change tracking. And just to remember, it's very easy to use. It's great for our ETL processes, for our app sync applications, some data restores, and there's very low overhead with absolute no custom coding. Everything's built in. The cleanup is automatic. It just allows you to track these changes, and you're off and running with 2 simple commands.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Brian, again for coming on Data Exposed. To our viewers, thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, go ahead, give it a like, leave us a comment, and let us know what you are going to use change tracking for. Check the description for links to learn more, and we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.